The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. That's what they say about perfect lives. Those beautifully curated facades held together by reputation, wealth, and just enough charm to fool the world. But sometimes the illusion shatters with a single moment. And in that moment, a woman discovers what she's truly made of. To the outside world, Madison Wexler had it all. An exclusive Bel Air estate with views stretching to the Pacific, an investment portfolio envied by tech moguls, and a husband, Ethan Wexler, whose name carried weight in the global real estate elite. Their life looked like a masterpiece carved in marble, flawless, intentional, immaculately styled. But beneath the velvet curtains and ambient glow of hand-blown Murano chandeliers, decay had taken root. One Tuesday night, in the room meant to embody innocence, the nursery for their unborn daughter, Madison would uncover a betrayal so deep that it would choke the very breath from her lungs. This isn't merely a story of cheating. It's the story of what happens when a woman of extraordinary poise is shoved to her limits and discovers the iron core she never knew she had. The air in the Wexler estate was unlike any other. Temperature-controlled, triple-filtered, faintly perfumed with white peonies and a trace of wood polish. A scent crafted by years of daily work from a staff trained to be seen only when summoned. To Madison, it was the scent of home. One she had cultivated with care over a decade of marriage to Ethan Wexler. But tonight, something was off. It was just past 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Ethan was supposed to be at a late-night strategy dinner with Korean investors, an ordinary night in their high-stakes world. Madison, now 8 months pregnant and carrying the weight of it in the arch of her spine, had spent the evening in her private office, finalizing a proposal for a children's literacy center in East LA. Her family, the Claibornes, an old dynasty in publishing, had raised her to understand a woman's legacy isn't defined by who she marries, but by what she builds. A sudden thirst pulled her from her thoughts. She moved barefoot across the cool travertine floor of the grand hallway, her hand instinctively resting on the smooth curve of her belly. The baby, already named Ivy, gave a gentle, rhythmic kick. Madison smiled. Everything was for her. This home, this empire, this carefully crafted future, it was all for Ivy. She passed the sprawling living room where a Warhol and a limited edition sculpture by Hearst stood in silent harmony. The lights were dim, shadows long and strange. Her housekeeper, Rosa, was unfailingly precise. Everything was always powered down before the staff retired for the night. That's when Madison paused. A chill ran down her arms. Something wasn't right. She heard a sound, not from the living room, but further down the corridor, a faint, breathy giggle. It was coming from the nursery. Madison's heart gave a sharp, unnatural jolt. Who could possibly be in there? That space was sacred, her sanctuary within a sanctuary. She had personally overseen every detail, each hand-stitched constellation on the silk ceiling, the custom-commissioned Margaret Wise Brown murals swirling softly across the walls. The scent inside was always the same, a delicate blend of lavender and chamomile. She misted it onto the crib linens every evening, a gentle ritual of welcome for her daughter. It was more than decor, it was devotion. Every soft hue, every quiet shimmer had been a promise that her daughter would only ever know peace and beauty, that no ugliness of the outside world would ever reach her in this room. Her bare feet made no sound as she moved toward the thick, soundproofed oak door. The giggling came again, clearer this time, feminine, breathless. Then a low murmur. A man's voice. Ethan's voice. Confusion collided with a sick, crashing dread. Just an hour earlier, he'd texted her from his supposed business dinner, attaching a photo of sock and handwritten on-screen text that read, "Sealing the deal for us, for you and Ivy, always." Her hand trembled as she reached for the large, cool brass doorknob. But she didn't turn it. She pushed. The door had been left slightly ajar. It swung open without resistance, and what she saw next would scar her soul forever. Only a dim moon-shaped nightlight near the crib lit the room, casting a soft silver glow over the two figures. Ethan, his designer wool blazer tossed carelessly over the nursery's antique rocking chair, had a woman pressed against the wall, directly beneath the mural of Goodnight Moon. Her dress, a slick sheath of crimson silk Madison had never seen, was pushed up around her hips, his hands tangled in her long dark curls as her head fell back in silent laughter. The sound, soft, smug, and utterly without shame, seared through Madison's chest like acid. Madison knew her instantly. Lena Bishop, the daughter of Gerald Bishop, founder of Bishop Holdings, the same conglomerate that Ethan had been battling for control over a billion-dollar development in Dubai. Lena, with her knife-edged cheekbones and infamous escapades, was a fixture on gossip sites. She was regularly spotted clinging to the arms of oil heirs, crypto kings, or scandal-prone CEOs. But it wasn't who she was that broke Madison. It was where they were. In the nursery. Ivy's nursery. The space where her daughter would someday rest her head. They were entangled beneath the mobile Madison had hung with her own hands. Their lust-filled breaths mingled with the soft lavender she had sprayed for Ivy just hours before. The crib, an heirloom of hand-carved walnut passed down from Madison's grandmother, stood just feet away, silently witnessing the desecration of the most sacred space in her life. For a moment that stretched beyond comprehension, Madison couldn't breathe. The air vanished from her lungs. Her vision tunneled to a sharp point of nauseating light. Every detail burned into her memory with brutal precision. The way Lena's red-lacquered nails sank into Ethan's shoulders. The possessive gleam in her eyes as she locked eyes with him. The way Ethan's platinum hublot, the one Madison had gifted him for their 10th anniversary, caught the faint light as his hand slid down Lena's back. The room twisted. The warmth of the nursery now replaced with an arctic chill that sank deep into her bones. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself, fingertips digging into the doorframe to anchor her to reality. They didn't see her. They were too immersed in their sordid world, violating everything Madison held sacred. A scream surged inside her throat, raw, scorching, but she swallowed it whole. She would not give them the satisfaction. She would not shatter. Wexler women did not weep. They strategized. Her grandmother's voice echoed through her memory like a litany. Tears are for the weak. The strong build empires from the ashes. It was not just a mantra. It was her inheritance. And tonight, that legacy would become armor. With a resolve she hadn't known she possessed, Madison backed away from the doorway. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the door nearly shut, leaving only the thinnest sliver of it ajar. Step by step, she moved backward, hand still pressed to her belly, not in wonder now, but as a shield. To protect Ivy, to protect herself. She retreated down the long hallway to the east wing, into the guest suite they rarely used, the one with sweeping views of the Los Angeles skyline. She locked the door behind her with mechanical precision. No lights, no sound. She sat on the edge of the bed, its unfamiliar brocade stiff against her skin, and stared blankly into the dark. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her grief was too cold for tears, too dense to escape through sobs. It sat inside her, growing sharper by the second, hardening into something fierce and immovable. The vision of Lena's crimson dress, the faint glow of the goodnight moon mural, it all played on a torturous loop behind her eyes. The betrayal was complete. This wasn't just an affair. It was war. And in his arrogance, Ethan had just handed his opponent a weapon beyond measure. A mother's righteous fury. Madison exhaled a long, jagged breath and reached for her phone. She didn't call her mother, or her sister, or her closest friend. She scrolled to a name listed under RB. The line connected on the second ring. "Robert," she said, her voice eerily calm. "It's Madison Wexler. I need you. I need you to bring the papers, everything in the contingency plan, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp." The line went quiet, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Robert Benton was not a man for pleasantries or unnecessary questions. At 64, with silver hair and a demeanor carved from decades of war in high-stakes courtrooms, he was known as the most merciless divorce attorney in Los Angeles. He had seen it all. He drafted Madison Wexler's prenuptial agreement 12 years ago, and, at her quiet urging, had created a far more aggressive, deeply confidential postnuptial clause 3 years later, back when she first sensed Ethan's shifting priorities. Ethan had chuckled dismissively at the softened draft she presented, calling it her legal hobby. He never knew about the real version, hidden in Robert's private vault. 10 a.m., Robert's voice finally said, low and steady. "Is the asset secure?" In their coded language, the asset wasn't a bank account or a property. It was Madison's safety, and by extension, her unborn daughter. The asset is contained, Madison replied, her gaze steady, locked on the distant shimmer of Beverly Hills. But the environment is irreversibly compromised. I understand. No further contact. Do not acknowledge or engage. I'll take over from here. A car will arrive at the rear entrance at 7 a.m. sharp. It'll take you to the Langford. I've secured the presidential suite under a holding company alias. You'll be completely undisturbed. Thank you. There was a pause. Madison, he said, her name softer now, touched by something almost human. You are the granddaughter of Colette Claiborne. Remember who you are. And then he hung up. Madison lowered the phone slowly, the words echoing like a sacred command. Remember who you are. Her grandmother had been a force of nature, a woman who rebuilt the Claiborne publishing hire from the ruins of war with nothing but a manual press and a spine of steel. She tolerated no weakness, and she certainly didn't tolerate betrayal. The hours that followed passed in a kind of suspended animation. Madison didn't sleep. She sat still, watching as the lights of the city blurred into a watercolor wash beyond the windows. At one point, Ivy moved inside her. A stronger kick this time, as if sensing her mother's unrest. Madison laid her hand over her belly, whispering in the dark. It's okay, sweetheart. Mama's here. Mama's gonna fix everything. I'll build a fortress around you. No one will ever get close enough to hurt you. Around 3 a.m. she heard Ethan moving, soft sounds echoing from the kitchen. The clink of a glass, the slow, heavy tread of his loafers across the marble floor. Then, the soft click of their bedroom door opening and closing. He had finally finished with his conquest and returned to their marital bed, probably reeking of Lena Bishop's drugstore perfume and self-satisfied arrogance. The thought didn't hurt anymore. It hardened her. At 6 a.m., before the first streaks of dawn touched the hills, Madison rose with purpose. Her movements were precise, cold, focused. She packed a single Rimowa suitcase with only the essentials, several comfortable maternity outfits from Loro Piana, her skincare and toiletries, her laptop, and one small, worn leather-bound journal filled with her grandmother's ironclad principles. She left the diamonds behind, the couture, the life. Well, almost. In the master bathroom, she paused. Then, with quiet precision, she removed her wedding and engagement rings, a flawless 10-carat diamond set once photographed for Harper's Bazaar, and placed them in the center of Ethan's marble sink. A final act. A statement. Then she slipped out, taking the staff corridors. It was not escape. It was extraction. Surgical, necessary, calculated. She moved with the stillness of someone who had gone beyond heartbreak, operating on resolve alone. She knew this building better than Ethan did, a remnant of her hands-on management style. The service elevator moved soundlessly, and just as Robert had promised, a black, nondescript Cadillac Escalade was waiting in the loading dock. The driver, his expression unreadable, opened the door, took her suitcase, and closed her into the plush silence of the leather interior. As the SUV pulled out onto a sleepy Bel Air side road, her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Morning, love. Woke up and you weren't here. Everything okay? Dinner ran late. I'm wiped. See you for breakfast. A second ping. Where are you? Rosa says she hasn't seen you. Madison stared at the screen, lips curling into a faint, bitter smile. The effortless nature of his lies was astonishing. She didn't respond. She powered off the phone and dropped it into her Hermes tote. She wouldn't be gaslit. She wouldn't be drawn into his false reality. No more justifications. No more rewriting reality to protect someone who saw her love as leverage. The conversation was over. From now on, Robert Benton would speak for her. The presidential suite at the Langford was exquisite, timeless, with sweeping views of the Santa Monica Mountains from its northern terrace. It felt anonymous, untouchable. A tray awaited her, Greek yogurt, fresh berries, decaf tea. She ate mechanically, not for herself, but for Ivy. She was no longer just Madison Wexler. She was the vessel of the next generation of Claibornes, and her duty was clear. At 9:55 a.m., her temporary phone chimed. We're entering your lobby now. Are you ready? R.B. Madison turned to the gilded mirror above the fireplace. The woman staring back was pale, eyes shadowed. But the softness had been tempered, burnished into something unflinching. Her sorrow now wore armor, but there was something new in them, something sharp, lit. The docile, well-dressed wife was gone. In her place stood the heir to the Claiborne legacy, a woman prepared to reclaim her name and her life. I was born ready, Rob, she said. Back in Bel Air, Ethan Wexler woke with the dull, throbbing headache only a $5,000 bottle of Yamazaki could deliver. He groaned, rolling over in their expansive bed, instinctively reaching for Madison, mind still foggy. But the space beside him was cold, empty. He frowned and sat up. That was strange. Madison was always an early riser, yes, but she usually stayed in the sitting area, curled up with a book or her iPad until he woke. Then he saw them. Her rings, perfectly placed in the center of his bathroom sink. Not thrown, not forgotten, positioned, intentional, final. A jagged spike of unease sliced through his hangover. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to shake off the haze. Bits of the night before came back in fragments. Lena's laugh, the glint in her eyes, the way she had led him into the nursery like it was some kind of twisted game. That had been her idea. He hadn't resisted. The thrill of it, the danger, the recklessness, had turned him on. The fact that Lena's father was his business rival only added gasoline to the fire. The nursery? It was just a room, he told himself. Madison was probably at her mother's in Santa Barbara. She did that sometimes when she needed a breather. Usually after a tough talk. He'd fix it. He always did. He was Ethan Wexler. He smoothed things over. Bought her a Basquiat sketch or something from Van Cleef. And she'd melt. Just like always. He shrugged into a cashmere robe and wandered out toward the breakfast nook, expecting to find his green juice waiting beside the journal. Instead, Rosa, their housekeeper, stood by the kitchen counter, visibly unsettled. "Good morning, Mr. Wexler," she said, voice tight. "Mrs. Wexler left very early this morning." "Yes, I figured," Ethan muttered, scratching his jaw. "Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir. A car picked her up from the service entrance." That stopped him cold. The service entrance? Madison never used the service entrance. The unease flared, sharper now. Real. Just then, the soft chime of the private elevator echoed through the foyer. Ethan exhaled in relief. There she was. Back already. Back to talk, to cry, to forgive. He schooled his features into something warm, humble, charming. The elevator doors slid open. It wasn't Madison. It was a man. He vaguely recognized the man from various high society events. A silver-haired predator in a suit so sharply tailored it looked like it had been sculpted directly onto his frame. Behind him stood a younger associate, equally stern, holding a thick leather briefcase. "Robert Benton," the older man said, his voice as cold and hard as the Italian marble beneath their feet. He didn't offer a handshake. "We have an appointment." Ethan's mind raced. Robert Benton, Madison's family attorney, the man who oversaw her trust, the Claiborne Foundation, and every major philanthropic and legal move her family had ever made. What the hell was he doing here? "Robert, this is unexpected," Ethan said, attempting to recover his composure. "Madison isn't here right now." "We know," Robert replied coolly, stepping out of the elevator as though he owned the home. His associate followed without a word. "Our business is with you, Mr. Wexler." He gestured toward the formal living room. "Shall we?" It wasn't a question. Stunned, Ethan led them into the room where a rare Basquiat hung above the fireplace. He suddenly felt foolish standing there in a robe. Robert and his associate settled onto the pristine cream sofa. The briefcase landed on the glass coffee table with a deliberate, unmissable thud. "I don't understand," Ethan said, raking a hand through his bed-tousled hair. "What is this about?" Robert snapped open the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of bound documents, navy blue cover, official gold seal. He slid them across the table. "This," Robert said, his eyes fixed squarely on Ethan's, "is a petition for the dissolution of marriage between Madison Claire Wexler and Ethan James Wexler, filed with the Superior Court of California just under an hour ago on the grounds of adultery." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Dissolution. Adultery. He stared at the paperwork in stunned silence, brain refusing to register what was in front of him. "This is ridiculous," he finally said with a strained chuckle. "She's just upset. We had a small argument, that's all." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Wexler," Robert said flatly. "The petition includes an emergency ex parte request for exclusive use and occupancy of this residence, the Santa Barbara estate, and the Aspen Chalet. Joint assets detailed on page 14 are frozen effective immediately." He flipped to the section and continued. "It also contains a temporary restraining order, prohibiting you from contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of my client." Ethan's face drained of color. You can't be serious. 500 feet? She's my wife. She's pregnant with my child. Robert didn't blink. A child whose sanctuary you defiled last night at approximately 10:15 p.m. with Miss Lena Bishop. The air was sucked from the room. Ethan's knees buckled. Madison had seen. She'd seen everything. The rings in the sink, their deliberate placement, suddenly made perfect horrifying sense. It wasn't petulance. It was a verdict. Where is she? Ethan barked, his voice sharp with panic. I need to talk to her. You will do no such thing, Robert Benton replied, rising to his feet. From this moment forward, all communication will go through my office. And let me be clear, my client has nothing to say to you. You have 24 hours to have your attorney contact me. A list of our non-negotiable preliminary demands is on page 3. I strongly suggest you read it carefully. He nodded to his associate, who calmly placed a second, slimmer document on the table. That is a copy of the restraining order. A process server is waiting downstairs to serve you formally. We're leaving now. I suggest you vacate the premises by end of day to avoid a more public exchange with LAPD. Ethan stood frozen. Words failed him. His mind, a vortex of disbelief, humiliation, and now the searing onset of fear. He had underestimated her. He saw her grace and mistook it for fragility. He saw her silence and mistook it for weakness. He believed he was the king of their empire, the visionary, the untouchable. But in one elegant, calculated move, Madison had checkmated him. All the power he thought immutable, money, status, control, was slipping through his fingers like sand. And the worst part? She hadn't needed to scream or fight or threaten. She had simply acted. And now the empire he built on ego was cracking at its foundation. Robert turned toward the elevator. That's when desperation soured into rage. This is a stunt, Ethan spat, his voice rising. She's using this, Lena, as a setup. This is about Vantage Properties, isn't it? She's colluding with Gerald Bishop, trying to gain leverage in the Dubai bid. Robert paused, then slowly turned, the corner of his mouth curling into something cruel and calm. It was the first sign of emotion he'd shown, and it chilled the room. Mr. Wexler, he said, voice soaked in disdain. You still don't understand, do you? You're the kind of man who looks at a masterpiece and sees only its auction price. You think this is about business, about leverage, about corporate moves. He stepped into the elevator. If you'll excuse the candor, you're a fool. This isn't about your little dance with Bishop Holdings. This is about what you did in a room filled with Goodnight Moon murals. You have profoundly misunderstood the woman you married, Mr. Wexler, and you are about to pay a price far greater than anything your balance sheet can quantify. The elevator doors glided shut, and Ethan Wexler stood alone, in his empire of glass and steel, clutching papers that marked the implosion of the world he once controlled. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. Not the absence of sound, but the collapse of illusion. Across the city, in the Langford suite, Madison was far from idle. While Robert dismantled Ethan's kingdom, she was assembling her own. A team from Robert's office had already delivered encrypted laptops and secure hard drives. Spread across the antique dining table weren't magazines or novels, but spreadsheets, trust ledgers, ownership charts, and holding company records, the product of 2 years of quiet preparation. She was no longer the figure behind the Titan. She was the storm coming for him. She was never the pampered trophy wife Ethan believed her to be. Her father, a shrewd but loving man, had insisted she earn her MBA from Wharton, just like he had. You must be able to read a balance sheet as easily as a poem, he used to say. While Ethan had been busy chasing investors and flattering financial journalists, Madison was the one combing through the fine print of his deals, catching discrepancies and liabilities that even his top advisors missed. She had been the silent architect of many of his biggest wins, a fact he conveniently omitted in boardrooms and magazine profiles. But now, the first item on her war table wasn't Ethan. It was Lena Bishop. Madison had long dismissed Lena as nothing more than a headline-chasing heiress, just another asset Gerald Bishop used for brand building. But her presence in Ivy's nursery wasn't careless. It was calculated. This wasn't passion. This was strategy. Rob, I want everything on her, Madison said over a secure line, and I don't mean the page 6 garbage. I want her contacts, where her money flows, her travel logs for the last 6 months. Hire the best. Whatever it costs. Already in motion, Robert replied. I've engaged a team from Kroll. You'll have a preliminary file by this evening. The dossier hit her encrypted inbox at precisely 7 p.m., and it was worse than she imagined. Lena Bishop was no party girl. She had a finance degree from LSE and a quiet but powerful role inside Bishop Holdings as Director of Competitive Intelligence. Her job? Uncover dirt, exploit weaknesses, undermine competition. Her string of high-profile flings with tech founders and hedge fund managers all coincided, suspiciously, with failed mergers and unexpected market fluctuations that favored her father's firm. Lena wasn't just Ethan's mistress. She was corporate sabotage with a killer smile. The PI's report included images. Lena at a secluded lunch with one of Ethan's resentful ex-board members. Lena in conversation with a journalist notorious for takedowns of LA's corporate elite. But the worst, phone records. Dozens of calls and encrypted messages between her and Ethan, spanning the last 4 months. A timeline that perfectly aligned with the series of insider leaks that had tanked Sterling West's stock and disrupted the Dubai acquisition, an acquisition Bishop Holdings had long tried to block. Ethan hadn't just betrayed her heart, he had betrayed their legacy. He had been sleeping with the enemy. The breathtaking stupidity of it almost made Madison laugh. His arrogance, his belief that he could manipulate everyone in his orbit. That same ego had made him the perfect mark. The next morning, a new piece of intelligence landed in her encrypted inbox, forwarded by Robert's team. This one? A bombshell. A source embedded within Bishop Holdings, cultivated quietly by Robert's investigators, had revealed the full scope of Lena's mission. She hadn't just seduced Ethan for sport. Her goal was to get close enough to him to obtain classified intel on a proprietary trading algorithm Sterling West had been developing, its codename Prometheus. It was the company's crown jewel, the engine behind its explosive profitability. Bishop Holdings intended to leak or distort the Prometheus specs to tank the stock price from within, collapse the pending acquisition, and then swoop in to buy Sterling West for a fraction of its value. Now the betrayal had a valuation, roughly $9 billion. Madison leaned back, letting the information settle in her mind. This changed everything. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was corporate war. And Ethan, in all his smug delusion, had handed her the perfect weapon. But using it wouldn't be so simple. Going public would crater Sterling West's valuation, destroying her own assets in the process, and most importantly, Ivy's future stake. She needed strategy, precision. She thought of her grandmother, Colette Claiborne, who once faced a brutal takeover attempt from a British publishing giant. They had threatened to blackmail her, waving around scandal from her late husband's past. But instead of folding, Colette held a press conference, admitted the indiscretion on her own terms, with poise and power, and then laid out every criminal deed the British firm had ever committed. Her legal team had been quietly compiling evidence for months. She hadn't just won, she'd obliterated them. They were buried in SEC investigations and criminal probes for over a decade. Never fight on their battlefield, her grandmother once told her. Build your own. Madison reached for the secure phone. Robert, she said, her voice calm and absolute. The plan has changed. We're not just filing for divorce anymore. We're going on offense. Set up a meeting, not with Ethan's lawyers. I want a meeting with Gerald Bishop, Madison said. And I want to be in the room. There was a pause on the line. Madison, that's highly unorthodox, Robert replied carefully. It could jeopardize our position. No, Rob, she corrected softly, but with steel behind it. It is our position. Gerald Bishop thinks he's playing chess with my husband. He's about to find out he's been playing checkers with me. And I'm about to flip the board. There was one more call she needed to make. This one to a number she hadn't dialed in nearly a decade. Jean-Luc Moreau, her grandmother's former chief of private security in Paris, a man who once owed his life to the Claiborne family, now long retired, but still a legend in international circles for his discretion, reach, and his ability to uncover truths even satellites couldn't detect. Jean-Luc, Madison said when he answered in his gravel-edged French accent. I have a small assignment in New York. I need everything you can get on a man named Gerald Bishop, not the boardroom stuff. I want to know where he buries his secrets. I have a feeling he and I have a lot to talk about. She didn't flinch at the idea of digging into the underworld of corporate secrets. She welcomed it. There was something electric in her veins now. A clarity born of betrayal, an appetite for answers that would not be quieted until justice was personal, surgical, and absolute. The woman who had once sat trembling in a guest suite, devastated and stunned, no longer existed. In her place stood a tactician, a general, and the war had begun. Meanwhile, Ethan Wexler was flailing, untethered in the ruins of his own making. He had been served, officially and humiliatingly, in the lobby of his own building. Now he was holed up, not in a hotel, but in a cold, glass-walled bachelor pad in Tribeca, the one he used for poker nights. A place Madison had likely known about for years. His first call was to his lawyer, Frank Miller, a man with the subtlety of a hammer and the PR instincts of a bouncer. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Frank had roared. "In the nursery? With the daughter of the guy you're trying to bury in a hostile deal? You gift-wrapped your own execution, Ethan? They're going to burn you alive." "We need to claim this was entrapment, a plant. She set you up." But Ethan knew the truth. There was no setup, no elaborate trap. It was ego, pure, arrogant, intoxicating ego, the kind that convinced him he could burn down his own house and charm his way out of the ashes. He had spent 2 days attempting to reach Madison, an unrelenting stream of texts, voicemails, emails. Nothing. He sent orchids to her mother's estate in Santa Barbara, a veritable jungle, only to get a call from her mother, a woman who once adored him. Her voice now colder than Alaskan marble. "Don't you ever contact this family again," she said, and hung up. Then came the first legal strike from Robert's office. Benton and Rowe's office wasn't just a legal firm. It was a command center of financial warfare. And what they filed against Ethan wasn't just a divorce petition. It was a coordinated blitz. A cascade of injunctions and liens targeted assets Ethan didn't even know Madison had access to. A shell company in the Caymans, a portfolio of rare watches in a Geneva vault, his private stake in a stealth mode AI startup he'd co-funded with college buddies. The prenup they had signed had once been his pride, airtight, crafted to protect their individual wealth going into the marriage. Madison's Claiborne inheritance was inviolable. Ethan's initial capital for Sterling West was safe. Or so he thought. The prenup gave him a 60-40 split of all new assets acquired during marriage in his favor. But Robert Benton ignored the prenup entirely. Instead, his petition argued for it to be thrown out altogether, on grounds of sustained emotional duress and gross marital misconduct. He cited new interpretations of California's asset division laws, claiming a 50-50 split of all assets, including the foundation value of Sterling West. It was bold, borderline absurd, but it had one purpose: to mire Ethan in an endless legal quagmire, bleeding him dry in fees, freezing his liquidity, and shaking market confidence. "They're coming for the company," Frank Miller said, panicked. "They're trying to claim her advisory role contributed materially to its growth. That makes it a jointly held asset." "It's ridiculous," Ethan snapped. He tried to push back, ordered his finance team to shift funds, reassign equity, hide holdings under new shells. At every turn, blocked. It was like Madison had a blueprint of his entire financial life. He forgot the hours she spent helping him with tax filings, the detailed Excel models she built to track quarterly performance, the private spreadsheets. He thought it was wifely diligence. She had been collecting intelligence. The war lines were clear. Ethan's defense? Portray Madison as unstable, a hormonal, irrational woman reacting to pregnancy with hysteria. Their first motion: demand a court-ordered psychological evaluation. A dirty, brutal move, meant to scare her. Robert Benton's counter? Surgical, ruthless. It included a sworn affidavit from Rosa, their housekeeper, detailing Ethan's repeated absences and the unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. A statement from their building's doorman, noting frequent late-night visits from a woman in a red sports car. And the PI's preliminary dossier on Lena Bishop. Not just portraying Ethan as unfaithful, but reckless, compromised, a CEO unfit to lead, a father incapable of protecting his family, a man who had, willingly, exposed his empire to a known corporate saboteur. The judge rejected the psych evaluation with scorn. Point: Madison. And while Ethan scrambled, Madison made her next financial move. The contingency document Madison had signed with Robert Benton 2 years earlier, one Ethan knew nothing about, granted Robert full power of attorney over her personal finances in the event of marital collapse. And now it was in motion. Utilizing that authority, Robert's team began quietly liquidating any remaining joint assets that were fluid, converting them into cash and transferring them into a newly formed trust. A trust bearing only two names, Madison Claire Wexler and Ivy. But that was only the beginning. She was also mobilizing the full might of the Claiborne fortune. Her private war chest, untouchable by prenup or court, was now weaponized. She hired a global team of forensic accountants, not to dismantle Sterling West, but to dissect it. Every spreadsheet, every wire transfer, every archived email. Their goal? Document Madison's invisible fingerprint on the empire. And they did. A 6-year-old email revealed that, at a moment when Sterling West teetered on collapse, Madison had leveraged her family's influence to secure a sit-down with a notoriously private French luxury magnate, leading to a life-saving investment. Ethan had taken full credit. They uncovered early interface sketches for Sterling's now famous algorithmic dashboard, drawn by Madison, who had a gift for user-centered logic and interface flow. Ethan passed them off as his own in pitch meetings. Even the launch capital for a key Sterling subsidiary? It hadn't come from Ethan. It came from the quiet, unpublicized sale of a Monet painting gifted to Madison on her wedding day. Piece by piece, the team built a legal and moral narrative. Madison wasn't the woman behind the man. In many ways, she had been the man. The once proud 60-40 split in Ethan's prenup began to look less like generosity and more like theft. Pressure mounted. Sterling West's board grew skittish. The restraining order and whispers of Ethan consorting with Gerald Bishop's daughter had been strategically leaked to a well-known columnist at the Journal. Ethan's grip on his empire was slipping. His resources? Shrinking. His confidence? Draining. He was waging war on two fronts, his company and his fortune. And the general on the other side knew every trench, every weapon, every vulnerability. A rage stirred deep inside him, blinding, burning. He told himself it was all disproportionate, that yes, he'd made a mistake, a stupid, arrogant human one, but did it warrant the complete annihilation of everything he'd built? In his fractured mind, Ethan began to see himself as the victim, the misunderstood builder, the betrayed. And slowly, dangerously, his thoughts circled back to the one thing they both still held sacred: their unborn child. The new strategy was as desperate as it was despicable. Through his attorney, Ethan filed a motion for immediate parental rights, a standard legal maneuver in most divorce cases involving children, but his filing was anything but standard. The language was venomous. He accused Madison of being emotionally unstable, claimed she intended to flee to France with the baby after birth, an act he painted as premeditated abduction. He demanded court-mandated co-parenting classes and a strict legal framework that would grant him joint custody from the moment of birth. It was a calculated move, not to protect Ivy but to shackle Madison, to weaponize their unborn child as a legal tether. When Robert informed her of the motion, Madison's reaction was not shock. It was rage, a cold, controlled fury unlike anything she'd felt before. Fighting over money was one thing. Dragging their unborn child into the battlefield? That crossed a line she hadn't even realized she'd drawn. Her pulse didn't spike, her breath didn't hitch, the fury didn't roar, it chilled. It spread like frost through her chest, numbing everything soft until only iron remained. He wasn't just trying to hurt her anymore. He was trying to own her. Through their child. And that, Madison vowed, would never happen. He has no idea what he just did, she said, her hand protectively resting on her belly. Her due date was in less than 4 weeks. The meeting with Gerald Bishop had been set. It would be held in a neutral zone, a private conference room at Skadden, a legal fortress known for handling multi-billion-dollar disputes like borderless states. Robert had advised her not to attend, but Madison insisted. She needed to look Gerald Bishop in the eye, and she would not do it as a wounded wife. She walked into that room as a strategist, as a CEO. She wore a custom navy sheath from the row, structured, refined, and tailored to accommodate her pregnancy without spotlighting it. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek chignon, her makeup minimal but immaculate. Her presence, undeniable. Every step she took echoed with purpose. The silence in the room shifted. No longer was she the outmaneuvered wife. They sensed the shift. This was a woman who had drawn blood and come back for the crown. Gerald was already seated, flanked by two of his top attorneys. Late 60s, weathered, eyes sharp as razors, he radiated the slow menace of a seasoned predator. He watched Madison with measured curiosity. No sign of Ethan. He had been barred from the meeting by mutual consent. "Mrs. Wexler," Gerald began, his voice gravel in civility, "let me say, on a personal note, I regret my daughter's involvement in your private." Madison raised a hand. "Mr. Bishop," she interrupted, voice even crisp, "let's skip the apologies. I'm not here for sentiment. I'm here to discuss the future of our companies." Gerald blinked, momentarily disarmed. His lawyers shifted in their seats. "Your daughter," Madison continued, her tone sharpening, "was deployed to seduce my husband. Her goal was to access the source code of our Prometheus algorithm. The plan," she said, folding her hands calmly, "was to destabilize Sterling West's valuation and allow your firm to acquire it at a discount. A decent strategy," she added, tilting her head slightly, "if a bit cliché." She let the silence stretch. Gerald Bishop's expression didn't shift, but in his eyes she saw it. A flicker, recognition, confirmation, checkmate's coming. "Here's what's going to happen," Madison said, leaning forward, her tone smooth and deliberate. "Your acquisition attempt? It's over. Effective immediately. You'll withdraw your bid for Sterling West and issue a public statement blaming unfavorable market conditions." One of Gerald's lawyers began to protest, but Gerald cut him off with a glance. "And why would I do that?" he asked, voice low and edged with menace. This was the moment. Her grandmother's press conference, reincarnated. Madison gave a small nod to Robert, who slid a sleek leather-bound folder across the table. "This," Madison said evenly, "is a preliminary dossier from my investigators. It includes 3 wire transfers, each traced from a Panama-based shell company tied directly to your personal trust, to one Robert Henderson, a board member at Sterling West. It also contains an audio recording of your daughter, Lena, bragging to a close friend about how she had my husband wrapped around her little finger and how she was days away from having keys to his kingdom." She paused. "The SEC tends to frown on insider trading and corporate espionage, particularly when they involve seduction as a strategy." Gerald's jaw tightened. He had miscalculated. He thought he was playing chess with Ethan. He hadn't realized the Queen was still on the board and in control. "And that," Madison added, voice sharpening, "is just the appetizer. My associate in Paris, an expert at uncovering corporate rot, has been digging into Bishop Holdings' archives, specifically your 2012 acquisition of a German pharmaceutical conglomerate. He uncovered discrepancies, bribes routed to Eastern European regulators via a Swiss art dealer, unreported lobbying expenditures, illegal shell purchases of contested patents. A very messy business. It would be quite the scandal, Mr. Bishop," she said, "if all of that were to land on the desk of der Bundesanstalt für Finanzdienstleistungsaufsicht." Silence, heavy, prolonged. Then finally, Gerald Bishop looked at her. Really looked, and Madison saw it. Not defeat, but respect. She had won. "What do you want?" he asked, voice stripped of pretense. "I've already told you," Madison replied. "You will withdraw your bid. But there's one more condition. I'm divorcing Ethan. The process will be ugly. And to protect my daughter's future, I need to secure a majority stake in Sterling West." "To secure that majority," Madison said, her voice even, "I need capital and leverage." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like a storm cloud. "Your daughter endangered my child, my family. For that, Mr. Bishop, there is a cost. You're going to give me that leverage. You will transfer, through the private trust my counsel has already prepared, the 15% stake in Sterling West you've been quietly acquiring on the open market over the past year. You'll sell it to me at a 20% discount based on yesterday's close." One of Gerald's lawyers audibly gasped, "That's outrageous. That stake is worth over $1 billion. It's worth far less than the cost of a full-blown international corruption probe into Bishop Holdings," Robert Benton interrupted, smooth as ice, "and far less than the fallout from a corporate espionage indictment against your daughter. Consider it," he added, "a family discount." Madison stood. The meeting was over. She held every card. Gerald Bishop knew it. He had underestimated her as a grieving wife, not realizing he'd awakened something far more dangerous, a strategist with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. His carefully calibrated world of influence and intimidation had just been overrun by a woman who wielded truth like a scalpel. He had weaponized seduction. She had turned that weapon on him. And now his failed attack on her family would be the exact fuel that saved it, reclaimed it for her child. "You have 24 hours, she said, turning toward the door. "Have your attorneys contact Mr. Benton with signed documents." She paused once more. "And Mr. Bishop, tell your daughter to stay away from my city, and far away from my nursery." She walked out without a glance back, leaving Gerald Bishop alone in the high-gloss silence, staring down at the folder, the emblem of his utter bloodless defeat. This wasn't just a hidden asset. It was a calculated masterstroke. Ethan thought she was fighting for money. She was fighting for control. And she had just become the largest single stakeholder in the company he once thought was his. The fallout came quickly and quietly. The very next day, Bishop Capital released a terse public statement. It was withdrawing its bid for Sterling West, citing changing market conditions. Investors were baffled, but the market shrugged and moved on. That afternoon, over $1 billion of Sterling stock changed hands in anonymous block trades. Beneath layers of blind trusts, cutouts, and holding vehicles, one entity emerged, the Ivy Wexler Trust. Through it, Madison Claire Wexler became the silent majority power at Sterling West. Ethan knew none of this. He was still flailing in a war that was already lost. Frank Miller was unraveling. Every legal maneuver he attempted was neutralized with surgical precision by Robert Benton's team. Even Ethan's Hail Mary custody motion was met with a devastating psychological profile that painted him as this. The portrait was brutal. A narcissist with erratic judgment, documented in sworn testimony from former colleagues and bolstered by the explosive details of the Lena Bishop affair. But the final confrontation didn't happen in court. Madison had no interest in a public spectacle. She agreed to one last meeting to finalize terms. It took place in Robert Benton's office, a space as imposing as a federal chamber, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the cold canyons of Midtown. Ethan arrived looking gaunt. The confident air was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. He had lost weight. His tailored brioni hung off him like borrowed armor. He took the seat across from Madison at the long walnut conference table. It was the first time they had been face-to-face since that night. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Madison, please," he rasped. "Let's stop this. Let's fix it for Ivy." She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't feel rage, only silence. A vast, emotionless silence. He was still trying to use their child as a shield, still playing the same old hand. "The time to fix this, Ethan," she said calmly, "ended the night you let another woman into our daughter's nursery. We're not here to reconcile. We're here to sign." Robert slid the final settlement agreement across the table. "The terms are non-negotiable," he said. Frank Miller opened his mouth, bluster rising. "Now wait a minute, a 50-50 division of all marital assets including controlling interest? My client will never agree to." "Oh, we're long past that," Robert said, smiling faintly. He slid another document across the table. A shareholder disclosure form. Ethan picked it up. He read it once, then again. His skin turned a colorless shade of gray. The controlling trust. The name. He looked up at Madison, stunned. "How?" he whispered. "You thought this was a divorce?" Madison said, finally meeting his eyes, her voice cold as steel. "This was a leveraged buyout. You put Ivy's legacy, our company, at risk with your recklessness. I simply secured it." The reality hit like a freight train. She didn't just leave him. She owned him. She now controlled the very empire he believed he built. He may have been CEO on paper, but she was the board. He now served at her pleasure. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably reversed. "The settlement," Robert Benton announced, voice clipped and precise, "is as follows. Mrs. Wexler will forego her claim to a 50-50 asset division. She is, after all, the generous majority shareholder." The sarcasm was needle-fine but lethal. "In return," he continued, "you will cede this penthouse, the Southampton estate, and the full art collection to her. You will also fund a $200 million trust in Ivy's name. Your remaining assets will remain untouched. You will continue as CEO of Sterling West on a probationary basis. Your conduct will be monitored by the board, which I now have the pleasure of advising." It was a surrender. comprehensive. He would keep his wealth, but he had lost his homes, his family, and his power. The crown remained on his head, but it was hollow now, a figurehead king. Crushed, Ethan signed the documents. His hand trembled. He pushed the folder forward and stood. And then he left. No words, no defiance, only silence. 3 weeks later, Ivy Madison Wexler was born. She had Madison's eyes and a peaceful soul. Madison, now again going by her maiden name, returned to the Fifth Avenue penthouse. The nursery had been completely redone. Gone were the storybook murals. In their place, an elegant, hand-painted landscape of the French countryside, just beyond her family's ancestral estate. The scent in the room was no longer lavender and violation. It was clean linen. Baby powder. A beginning. She didn't look for a new relationship. Her focus was singular. Her daughter and her empire. As chairwoman of the board, she was strategic, sharp, and relentlessly composed. Her quiet authority proved far more effective than Ethan's charm had ever been. In boardrooms, she wasn't merely respected, she was feared, and ultimately she was victorious. One evening, with Ivy sleeping against her chest, Madison stood before the vast penthouse windows. Central Park glittered below. She was no longer the woman who had once lived in this space. That woman had been burned away in the fire of betrayal. What remained had been forged in steel. She was her grandmother's legacy made manifest. Not just a survivor, but a commander of storms. Madison Claire Wexler's story is a testament that the most profound betrayals can birth the most unshakable resolve. She didn't just get mad, she didn't just get even. She rewrote the rules entirely. She turned pain into power, secured not just her future, but her daughter's legacy. She walked in on a nightmare and walked out owning the dream. True strength? It's not about never falling. It's about how you rise. And in the world of the elite, sometimes rising means taking everything. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you're still listening, still reading, then maybe something in Madison's story touched your heart. And if it did, maybe it's because you've seen shadows like hers. Maybe you've walked down a hallway, heart pounding, afraid of what you might find on the other side of a door. Maybe you too have been underestimated. What this story teaches us, what it demands we remember, is this: your silence is not weakness. Your grace is not fragility, and your pain is not your end. Madison didn't just survive betrayal. She turned it into strategy, into leadership, into empire. She went from being a supporting character in someone else's story to the author of her own. It reminds me of a quote from the otherism philosophy. When they tried to silence you, they did not know they were giving you the gift of your own voice. And Madison found hers, not by shouting, but by acting, by choosing clarity over chaos, strategy over sentiment, legacy over loss. So maybe tonight, if you're staring at your own closed door, heart beating with fear or doubt, maybe remember this: you are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to do next. If Madison's journey sparked something in you, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button, share this with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and subscribe for more stories like this. Let's build a community of those who rise, not by chance, but by choice. And before you go, tell me in the comments, if you were Madison, what would you have done? Until next time, take care of your story. Rewrite it if you must, but never let anyone else hold the pen.